Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back. I'm Sam and you're here at Tabletop Archives, which is where I'm hoping you are trying to end up. If you're lost, hi. Also, please stay a while. I promise we aren't that weird. Welcome to episode 2 of our DM Firesides, where we will be introducing you all to the DM Fiat. Screw the title screen, go here, Nick. Before we get started, I just want to take a minute to remind everyone to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to get notifications when we post new videos, now bi-weekly until the end of time, make sure that you ring the notification bell. Metaphorically, please don't hit your device with the tiny mallet. Also, just a quick disclaimer, I'm probably going to throw this in on every fireside from here on out because it merits saying, I'm going to talk about some ways to run a game today. In no way am I trying to say that this is the way to do things or that other ways don't work. But these are some effective techniques that I've encountered, and actually if you have any alternative versions to anything I suggest here today or in any other video, please throw it in the comments. We'd love to hear about how other people handle their tables. That's how you grow as a DM. Last week I mentioned the DM Fiat and that we'd go over it in a future video. Well, the future's now. The DM Fiat is not my car. It's a lame joke, I apologize. I'm talking about a fiat in the sense of an authoritative command, and here we're talking about using your authority as the arbiter of the narrative storytelling engine to circumvent the rules if, and that is a big if, doing so enhances the experience for your players. We're going to discuss today the simplest and most frequently encountered example of the DM fiat, which is averting a roll to instead handle a situation narratively. Almost everything that your players will ever do in any game will have a roll tied to it, which is all well and good. The random element introduced by dice is part of the tabletop gaming experience. However, rolls take time. I'm looking at you, Shadowrun. And time is a valuable commodity. Moreover, time spent rolling is time that you're not spending role-playing or otherwise moving the narrative along, and too much time rolling can really break up the flow of your game. The question becomes, when can I forego a roll and handle the event narratively instead? The answer that I would posit to this question is if the outcome of the roll doesn't add anything to the narrative. Now, I'm not saying that you should ask if the action being taken is relevant. I'm specifically saying if the specific succeed or fail outcome of this specific die roll will impact the overall course of the story. Let me give an illustrative example. Let us suppose that we are playing a game of Dungeons & Dragons and we have a party's rogue and their wizard. Our rogue is a reasonably built chap with +3 dex mod and proficiency in thieves tools. Our wizard is being played by a cheeky min-maxer, so he dumped dex. He's a very bad min-maxer. And so they have -1 dex mod and no tool proficiencies because tool proficiencies are just fluff. Our two characters are presented with a locked door with a DC 15 lock, and they want to open it. The question for us is, does this roll matter? We're going to look at 3 cases. Case 1, the rogue is opening the door. The door is unguarded, no one's going to try and stop them, and they have a narratively open-ended amount of time to accomplish this task. Even if the rogue fails their first attempt, they are likely to succeed within a few more rolls, and there is no narrative impact of taking the time to try a few more times. On top of that, narratively interpreting the rogue's stats, the rogue is someone who is good at picking locks, and this is not an especially robust lock. It makes sense that this falls in the purview of something that they can just do in an uncomplicated and low-stress environment. So for these reasons, I would say that this roll doesn't matter, and all I would do by enforcing it is waste a bunch of real-world time until the character inevitably succeeds. Case 2, the wizard is now opening the door, which is still unguarded and there's still no time crunch. Now, the wizard is not very likely to succeed. They've got a 25% chance of success compared to the rogue's 55%. Given enough time, they could probably get lucky and open the door. It's that whole give a million monkeys a million typewriters and you get Shakespeare eventually thing, but statistically, it's unlikely to happen on an individual roll. Additionally, the wizard has no training in this, and they're not very dexterous, so there's not a whole lot of narrative justification as to why this is something they can even do. I wouldn't say that they can't make the roll, because they can always attempt to stick a hairpin in a lock and pray, and they might get lucky, but I'm certainly not going to let them open the door without a roll, and I'm also not going to let them just keep attempting the roll until they roll a 16 plus. So this roll very much matters, and I would make them roll for it. Case 3. Either of the characters is opening the door, which is now in an occupied fort, and there's a guard patrol about a minute down the hallway. Now, we already established that this is an appropriate task for the rogue and not so much for the wizard. However, The impact of failing the roll now matters because every failed attempt brings that guard 6 seconds closer to the party. So because of that, I would make whoever is trying to attempt to open the door roll. Even if they're a 20th level character with a plus 12 bonus, there is still a significant impact if they fail, even if that event is very unlikely. So that's the basic idea, and you can apply that philosophy in a lot of areas. Remember, dice are a part of tabletops to add randomness and uncertainty to your story. Without dice, a tabletop just turns into that thing that every kid on Earth does at some point, where you have an imaginary tank and your buddy has an imaginary tank, and you say your tank has nukes, and now your buddy's tank suddenly has anti-nukes, whatever those are. 5-year-olds of the world, please explain. Keeping that in mind, if you're ever in a situation where the randomness isn't important and the chance of failure doesn't really add anything to the story, you can probably just skip the dice and add more of the story through narrative instead. Another situation that I see this come up a lot is combat scenes where the party has basically already won and it's just people throwing dice on a table for 5 minutes to try and see who gets the last hit. There's no remaining risk to the party. It's usually better story and much faster to just say, okay, you've won the fight. What do you want to do now? How do you want to wrap up this combat scene? Not only does this streamline the flow of play, it also encourages your party to do things other than just grinding their defeated opponents into a bloody pulp. I've seen a lot of people kind of get locked into that mindset of, I'm acting on initiative, so I'm supposed to be attacking, even if the fight's over and you've clearly defeated your opponents already. Also, real quick, before we wrap up, I do want to talk about one other thing, and this is sort of tangential to what we've talked about today, but we couldn't think of a better video to put it in. It's important to remember in any game system that has a skill system, which is most tabletop RPGs, that having ranks or proficiency or whatever the game calls it in a skill is more than just a mechanical advantage. What I mean by this is, for instance, in Dungeons & Dragons, the mechanical difference between having proficiency or not in a skill at level 5 is a 10% increased chance of success. Narratively, though, it represents a lot more. Going back to our previous example, it's not just that the rogue's proficiency gives them a +2 to their roll. Narratively, it's indicative that they actually have training and experience in using a variety of very specialized tools that the average or non-proficient person doesn't have knowledge of using. It can be important, depending on how your party feels, to make this a relevant point in gameplay. And I find it's easiest to do things like this. If the trained rogue tries to pick a lock and fails, that's all that happens. They fail. They know what they're doing, so maybe they don't get the tumblers quite right. There's no penalty associated with it. However, if the untrained wizard tries and fails, then maybe their lockpick breaks and they can't just go and try again right away. Do not mention mending. This both helps prevent the aforementioned just keep rolling forever until they get lucky scenario in a very organic way, and it also rewards the rogue for investing in being good at picking locks, and that's the important bit. Reward the character that invested build resources in being good at something. Don't punish the untrained character for thinking outside of the box. Also, as an aside, this whole situation is a little bit more pronounced in D&D than other games such as Shadowrun, because D&D does not have any built-in mechanic for defaulting to your attribute bonus or to prevent endless rerolls, unlike other game systems such as Shadowrun. Anyway, we're getting to wrap-up time once again. Thank you all for joining me here today by the DM Fireside. If you have any topics that you'd like to see, go ahead, leave a comment below. And again, please be sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you hit that notification bell to get updates whenever we post new content. It's been great having you here today, and I look forward to seeing you again here at Tabletop Archives. I promise we'll get one eventually. We're working on it.